everybody. My name is Gabriel Silva. I'm a former member of parliament here in Panama. I'm very thankful and excited to share with you a little bit about Panama's sea turtles law. And let's get right to it. I was a member of parliament from 2019 to 2024. And one of the most important laws that we approved 10 important laws, is this sea turtle protection law. In this presentation that I'm excited to share with you guys, we'll talk a little bit about the idea that originated this law and the challenges in the process of approval. Does the law contain, and also its implementation today. We're also going to talk a little bit about Panama's nature rights law, which I also proposed while I was in Congress, but it's going to mainly focus on Panama's sea turtle protection law. This presentation is going to be about an hour, and I know that we're going to have later a live Q&A session where we can go even deeper on this important topic. So, really excited. Thank you very much for the invitation, and let's get to it. Perhaps some of you have visited Panama or know Panama or have heard recently of Panama, particularly what's happening with the Panama Canal. And it's interesting because one of the reasons that we have a Panama Canal is precisely because of our location in the middle of the Americas, and that we're a country, a strip that is connects the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic or the Caribbean. And Panama is a country that connects these two oceans, and it has a coast of over 2,500 kilometers, and it makes it a crucial haven for sea turtles. And as you guys might know, there's 7 species of sea turtles in the world. 5 of them are in Panama. We have 2 oceans, and all of them are threatened. In Panama, we have the following sea turtles. We have the leatherback turtle, or in Spanish, the tortuga baula. We also have the Oliver Riley turtle, Tortuga golfina, hawkbill turtle, Tortuga carey. This one's very common and important for our culture. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. The green turtle, famous green turtle, the Tortuga verde, and the loggerhead turtle, which is the Tortuga boa. Fortunately, as mentioned, all of these sea turtles are in danger in Panama. And turtles are an integral part of our ocean's ecosystem. And as we will explain it later, it has an environmental impact, what's happening with the sea turtles, a cultural impact, an economic impact. But all of this makes Panama a key country for regional sea turtle survival. And I think it's an ethical responsibility for us to protect them. I mean, we're blessed. We have so much presence of sea turtles, but we have to protect them. And I was just recently, 2 weeks ago, on one beach in Panama, the Pedasi area that's connected to the Pacific, where it hosts around 3,000 hawkbill nests each year. And this underscores the importance of Panama's nesting sites. So, as mentioned, sea turtles have an important impact in the world, but particularly in Panama. There's environmental impact that we have to start from that point. Sea turtles are not only this beautiful, charismatic, amazing being that we see in this picture, beautiful marine reptiles, but they're also integral to our ocean systems. The ecosystems they're particularly important in Panama, and they're long-lived migratory species, having been planet Earth for over 200 million years, and they are essential, as mentioned, for our ecosystems because they maintain healthy the seagrass beds and the coral reefs, and they help balance marine foods and transport nutrients across the region. So when we're talking about sea turtle protection, we are actually not just talking about these particular species, we're talking about ocean protection. We're talking about environmental protection. We're talking about our planet Earth protection. And this is not just a narrative, it is a fact. And it's real. There's well documented cases, Panama, Caribbean, in Costa Rica, Mexico, where there's massive ecological effects, ample evidence, where without sea turtles, entire ecosystems can disappear. So they are very important for our ecosystems. But there's also a cultural impact. Turtles are part of our culture in Panama. Um, and they're just not, its importance, it's carried around for centuries in the Republic of Panama. Indigenous communities like the Gunas and other coastal communities have traditional ties to sea turtles, like go from legends to art, uh, and the subsistence of sea turtles and their eggs are very important for them. As you can see, this is, for example, a mola, which is a very traditional art where you can see a turtle. And this is made by the Guna indigenous community that are mainly located in the Atlantic Caribbean side. So they're just not ecological icons, they're deeply embedded in our cultural fabric and our historic memory. And as mentioned, among the Panamanian indigenous communities of the Naivule, the Gunas, and the Mberawana and Wanan, the turtles are prominently important in stories, in art, and in oral tradition. And for example, as mentioned, the Gunayala, you see these beautiful pieces of molas that are created from traditional textile art. And the turtle symbolizes fertility, patience, and balance with nature. And the oral histories, the regions of Azuero and Bocas del Toro mention sea turtles as the grandmothers of the sea, emphasizing their role as ancient beings that have existed long before human beings. So there's a very important cultural aspect in Panama and in many countries in the world. And there's also the economic impact. Sea turtles are also carrying a significant economic value, both from Panama, and you can see that also at a global scale. Their importance goes to tourism, fisheries, and even ecosystem services. For example, in Panama, protecting sea turtles is not just about ethics or ecology, it's a sound economic policy, and this has been proven also. There are pillars of ecotourism, fisheries, and ecosystem services directly linking biodiversity with livelihoods. Turtle watching, for example, is a growing ecotourism sector in the Caribbean and Central America. In Isla Cañas, in Los Santos, nesting turtles attract thousands of visitors annually with community-led initiatives that generate income for families who act as guides, have homestays, or sometimes even self-craft. So this happens in Panama, happens in Costa Rica, happens in Colombia. They have a very strong economic impact. There's even some several studies, international studies from the, for example, Inter-American Development Bank that estimates that sea turtle tourism generates far more revenue than even turtle hunting ever did. And you can find in Panama in the regions of Bocas del Toro and Coiba, where there are hotspots for turtle diving and snorkeling. Actually, I'm going this weekend to Coiba to dive to see at the sea turtles, and a lot of people come from all over the region to look at the sea turtles. And this feeds to Panama's broader ecotourism industry, which is a major share of our GDP, and also in Costa Rica, which is our neighboring country. So the economic part is also important. But here's the thing, we have all of these important aspects, uh, so-called benefits, economic, cultural, and so forth. But if unregulated, if it's not taken care of, they can pose a threat. For instance, tourism and coastal development have exploded in the recent decades, bringing light pollution, habitat loss, and boat traffic to the once pristine beaches that hosted sea turtles. And unplanned beachfront constructions, for example, they're poorly managed. They deliver a lot of waste along the coast, which also affects the habitats of the sea turtles. And also, poaching and illegal trade have long plagued turtle populations. Some beaches where, unfortunately, up to 90% of eggs have been dug up by poachers for sale. Yeah, and that's very unfortunate. That happens in Panama in the region. Turtles sometimes are hunted for their meats, for their eggs, and for their shells to craft jewelry and necklaces and so forth. Practices that are definitely unsustainable. So there is a huge threat. The bycatch fisheries is another persistent threat where turtles are often drowned in shrimp trawls or get hooked when they're fishing other fishes. And that definitely happens in Panama, affecting the diversity. And this is a sobering backdrop in Panama, a nation of extraordinary biodiversity, where iconic sea turtles have been here for hundreds of years. Nevertheless, in the last 25, 30 years, marine wildlife in Panama has been declining. And this not only has happened in Panama, but also in the world, where we have studies from the Earth Loss Center, for example, that states that at least 50% drop in marine biodiversity in the last 30 years in the world. So in Panama, unfortunately, five of the sea turtle species are in danger, and we need to act. mentioned, this is something that is a huge responsibility that we have. So that is what demanded or called us to action, recognizing that though we have a privilege in Panama of having the opportunity to have five species of sea turtles, but that also comes with a huge responsibility. So, how did we confront these challenges that are happening in regards to sea turtle protection in Panama? The journey of this Law 371, which protects sea turtles, began at a grassroots level, driven by citizens, scientists, and also conservationists, long before I was actually in the House of Congress, of Parliament, long before I was a member of Parliament. And this is a key message that I want to share with you. I know all parliamentarians in the world and all politics are very different country to country, but something that I've seen at a global scale in most countries, you must never underestimate the power of community organizations in transforming public policy, whether it be sea turtle protection or others. Citizens organizing themselves and pushing for reform can cause change. Not always, but can cause change. And the history of Law 371 began, as mentioned, well before I was a congressman. In the late 2010, there were, I mean, organizations focused on sea turtle protection have existed for over 30 years in Panama. We have over 15 organizations, I think 14, 15 organizations that are all together organized under the umbrella of Pana Tortugas. It's an organization that has existed for a long time now. And they're always doing strong activism on the beaches, protecting sea turtles, and raising alarms about the sea turtles' future. When I was a kid, I actually went to a couple of their events when I was around 16, 15, and that was the first time I got exposed to sea turtle protection and the importance of this nonprofit organization. They do beach patrols, nest protection programs, educational workshops in local villages, in the cities, and they foster dialogue between the communities, volunteers, citizens, government, residents, in order to listen to their concerns and help draft plans and execute plans to help the sea turtles. So I remember once again when I was a kid going to Pedasi, where villagers, local nonprofits, Para Tortugas was present, and just see their passion in protecting sea turtles. Definitely, it's sparked an interest in me back then. But fast forward several couple of years, 2019, I was elected as an independent congressman in Panama. And as a congressman, I was focused on citizen participation, transparency, anti-corruption, and bringing politics closer to the people. So I organized weekly town hall meetings and one-on-one meetings with members of the community so that they could voice their concerns, ask questions, just ideas, or just check in with their local congressman. And in one of those meetings, Para Tortugas, which is this organization that encompasses, it's an umbrella organization for several turtle protection nonprofits, they arrived to my office and they mentioned the possibility of starting the igniting the fire for the idea of a sea turtle protection law. I mean, immediately it was a turning point for me and my team. I remember feeling a strong sense of passion, of interest, of curiosity, and responsibility when listening to them. And immediately my team and I got to work. So we did comparative analysis of the law, understood Panama's legal framework, international framework, and studied different regulations, different studies from different international organizations. We met with local and international experts and even went on a couple of occasions to the beaches to watch sea turtles hatch from their eggs. So there was a lot of research involved in Congress and also outside of Congress, which is very important. Drafting a law was a collaboratory process from start to finish. We formed working groups with legal experts, marine groups, marine biologists, but it was also very important to do field visits. At the same time, we know paper laws and all of these studies are important, but you have to go to the field. So this is my team and I going to the Pedasi region. This is basically 7 to 8 hour drive from the city, where we met with local experts, with the citizens, with the environmental protection agencies, And we also saw the sites at night with the conservationists. We saw firsthand the fragility of these environments and also the dedication of the local people in protecting them. So we decided to go to the field and see this. So those experiences were really good in forming our drafting of the law, and we wanted to get all of those insights, not only because it was going to help us create a better policy, but also because, as mentioned, citizen participation is essential in democracies. And when other members of Congress saw that there were all of these organizations involved, that we went to the field, they obviously felt a little bit more pressure in regarding to put this in the agenda and discuss it. And we had biologists that provided data. We had indigenous elders sharing their perspectives and their spiritual values, and we had the nonprofits. So it was a very strong, organized community effort. And this happened for throughout 2021, 2022, where we wrote and revised the bill, and we held these listening sessions and co-created the bill. Now, the legislative process in Panama, as well as in Congress all over the world and different parliaments, it's not easy. Definitely, it has its difficulties. And I was in a minority group with a small caucus, the Independent Caucus. We're just 4 members out of 71, so we had to do additional work. Um, and it was a very strong challenge in turning that ambitious proposal into something that could get approved. It took us over 2 years. I think when I think about it, 2 years seems like a lot of time for just normal terms, but sometimes several projects in Parliament can last 3, 4, or 5 years even to get approved. So it took us some time, but among all, I think it was a good amount. Wasn't that long, and I introduced the bill in late 2021 under my sponsorship, and also I got a lot of co-sponsors from different members of Congress. That was very important. And as you might know, in democracies, most democracies, you have to approve a law in 3 debates. And that, in this case, the first debate is the Environmental Committee, which I was part of. And the bill was formally called Protection and Conservation of Sea Turtles, assigned to the Environmental Committee. And in the Environmental Committee, we created a subcommittee which analyzed in detail the law for over 6 months, perhaps even more. And it was super important to take the time to invite, as mentioned, all of the organizations. They came to Congress, the international experts. We have people from international organizations participating and contributing and pushing the law, and this created a very important presence and pressure. Now, this obviously didn't came without its opposition and resistance. One would think, sea turtle protection law, why not do it? Endangered species. But as I learned in politics, every coin has two sides. And this topic also affected some people. There was some opposition on fronts. There was political opposition, economic opposition, cultural, and sometimes even scientific. But instead of dismissing these voices, we engaged them, adjusted the text, and built bridges. And this helped us advance the bill and move forward. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the opposition and how we address this opposition. Um, the first opposition was already from fellow lawmakers, other members of parliament. Several members of Congress worried about the financial implications. Will the Minister of Environment have the resource to monitor nesting beaches, enforce the bans, and fund the conservative projects across both coasts? And we responded by demonstrating that the bill created mechanisms for partnerships with NGOs, universities, which will some way reduce the burden of the government alone. That was important. Then there was also the other concern from the lawmakers or members of Congress in regards to the fishermen and the bycatch. Legislators echoed the fear of coastal constituencies who small local fishermen, which were worried about the, the their livelihood, and also if they're going to be criminalized, they now hunt or fish for sea turtles. And what happens if they accidentally capture a sea turtle? And we clarified that the law promoted collaboration, not punishment, and that required the states to provide training, gear swaps, and monitoring of the programs. We're going to talk a little bit about that later. And there was also concern by members of Congress about the tourism and how it was going to affect tourism and if was going to affect touristy projects across the coast. And we emphasized that the law was not anti-tourism. On the contrary, it encouraged turtle-based ecotourism that benefit communities instead of large-scale extractive tourism that harms the beach. So that was one group, the lawmakers. Then we had also opposition from artisans and traditional product groups. Now, this was a very delicate topic because you're obviously talking about livelihood, the economic of a family, and they feel this as a threat that you're taking away something that is part of their bread, their food. You know, for generations, their artisan families in regions like Colón or parts of Azuero that have crafted jewelry, combs, and ornaments from different turtles. The carey turtles, for example, as mentioned, very, very valued for these types of jewelry, combs, and so forth. And sometimes also their eggs are sold in the local market. So for them, this bill represented a crisis, existential threat to our economy. And so I think it was first important to recognize that that's real. You know, their concerns is valid. But the law, by prohibiting trade in turtle parts, meant that they were going to be affected. But we provided some alternatives. Our approach was basically we engaged them directly in the workshops to discuss transition programs, including shifting towards coconut shells, wood, and other products as substitutes for the economy and for their artistic expressions. And we built into the final text provisions of the law government support and training for artisans to find sustainable materials and new markets. The dialogue was framed that the bill was not an attack on artisans or tradition, but a chance to modernize their crafts while still honoring their heritage. And many of these local groups and indigenous groups at the same time believe in the importance of preserving nature. So we find a kind of a contradiction. They want to preserve nature, but at the same time they're affecting nature. So it was very important to find local community indigenous leaders that were able to explain to some of them the importance and a holistic and spiritual angle to the regulation and in protecting sea turtles. So that was important. In these pictures, you can see at the bottom right corner, that's the pollera, which is Panama's national dress, and the combs that the woman is wearing have parts of sea turtles. And this is like the traditional Panamanian folkloric dress used in all of the festivals. So it was a very delicate topic, obviously. Beautiful dress, by the way. And then you have also position from tourism agencies. They would say, tourism operators, particularly those promoting adventure, mass tourism, fear that the restriction got into their business models. But we argue the opposite. Turtle conservation actually enhances Panama's tourism, its brand. It helps generate an ecotourism strategy on the long term. It's going to represent more income and more opportunities for them. And we presented case studies like in Costa Rica, Mexico, where turtle conservation is a cornerstone of their tourism sector. So we are reassured the sector that we're going to add clauses about promoting ecological tourism with certification programs and government support. That was included. And then we had opposition from scientific and technical groups, a smaller group, but notable and obviously strong group because they were, in essence, our allies, but there were some, the scientific community, it's not that big, but you have obviously discerning voices that they were not necessarily opposing turtle protection, but there were concerns about the legal design of the bill and also their participation in the bill. Some question whether the giving turtles explicit rights would weaken the existence of conservation laws or create ambiguities, and will the courts be able to interpret those rights effectively? Will this distract the courts of enforcing other rights? Will it distract the Minister of Environment from protecting broader environmental rights? So, legitimate concerns in regards to scope, and these critics force us to sharpen the language of the bill a little bit, incorporating cross-reference from international treaties ensuring consistency with existing obligations, and also clarifying jurisdictional limits, focusing on Panama's obligations within its territory and waters while committing to international cooperation. So far from weakening the law, I think that scientific scrutiny, which just received a little bit of a challenge at the beginning, helped us improve it and assure our durability and consistency. So, a fundamental point from this opposition is that each of these different groups that show resistance, they were given a seat in the committee that get created in the law that is in charge of assuring that the law is adequately implemented. This was very important, making them part of the committee and providing them with a real participation and voice, even from the fishermen, from the artisans, scientific, that they have a voice and an opportunity to be heard. So the day of the approval, it was approved in Parliament after three debates. Here is us the day there it was approved, holding the bill. What a nice day. You see there members of Congress, people from the Ministry of Environment, all other members of Congress and their staff, and also people from the nonprofit sectors. Here we are taking a picture outside of Parliament. They're so happy. It was such a nice moment, and it was a historic moment for us, for Panama, for environmental protection, because it was not just another wildlife law. It signals Panama's leadership in recognizing legal rights for a species, marrying traditional conservation with an ethical rights-based approach. More on that later. And for those of us who shepherd the law from ideal reality, it was a moment of hope, but also the start of a new challenge. Turning the law into a reality. That's another challenge. You have the law, but its implementation is always a challenge. And the law has been recognized in international and national outlets, and it has even been recognized by famous actor Leonardo DiCaprio in his Instagram post. It mentioned the importance of the law. So a lot of international recognition that is always good for the law and for the country. So let's talk about the content of the law. What does the law actually say? Perhaps some of you have access to the law and have reviewed it, but just as a way of summary, let's talk about the most important things. Law 31 of 2023 is a comprehensive and innovative law, and it has classic conservation measures with groundbreaking legal principles. And I'll break down its more important contents and highlight what makes this law a pioneer in the environmental legal field. At the heart of the law, it's Article 29. The law explicitly recognizes the sea turtle as a subject of rights, effectively granting them a form of legal person. This is spelled out most clearly in this Article 29, the protection of the rights of turtles and their habitats. There, the law states that sea turtles have the right to live and have free passage in a healthy environment, free of pollution and other anthropocentric impacts that cause physical damage and damage to their health, such as climate change, incident capture, coastal development, and unregulated tourism, among others. In other words, turtles are no longer seen as merely objects of human management. They are recognized in our legal systems as being with intrinsic value and rights to exist and thrive. And this is a paradigm shift, which is profound. The remarkable aspect of the law is that it explicitly says sea turtles as a living creature have rights, and it specifies those rights so they can be applied. By detailing these rights, in habitat, free movement, to unharmed by human activities, the law provides clear benchmark against a clear again a benchmark which the government and private actors can analyze and implement. We'll talk about more about the difference between traditional approach to environmental protection versus granting rights later in the presentation. One of the most important articles that we have in the law is Article 7, which talks about habitat protection and development controls. Um, we have to recognize that habitat loss is a major threat, and the law 371 addresses coastal development and tourism head on. Article 8, for example, mandates that any existing or proposed activity or project in the nesting areas must undergo rigorous environmental assessment focused on turtle impacts. In practice, this means that construction of resorts, seawalls, or other infrastructure near critical nesting beaches can be halted or modified if they're threatening turtle habitats. The law explicitly penalizes irresponsible real estate development and tourist operations that disrupt turtle nesting sites. It even authorizes agencies to suspend or revoke the license of tour operators or businesses that violate regulations in turtle habitats. This is a strong tool. For example, if a beachfront hotel is regarding nesting season guidelines, uh, now they can be legally shut down. By codifying such power, the law ensures that economic activities bow to a higher priority of the species. Then there's also Article 10, which is very important. It's about the fisheries bycatch mitigation. As you know, to tackle the problem of accidental capture, which is called bycatch fisheries, the law requires the fishing sector to adopt measures to avoid it. From the text calls that they received about reports on the fisheries, authorities and fishing communities to implementing technology fixes such as devices to drastically reducing incidental turtle deaths. This is very important. It's not just an abstract duty. The law ties compliance to licensing, meaning fishing vessels or operators could lose their permits if they consistently fail to implement bycatch prevention measures. In essence, it's what we want is that sea turtles are not captured by accident, and the law also promotes research into improved gear and real-time turtle monitoring to study the migration patterns to help avoid the bycatch. Article 12 and 13 is the National Committee and the action plans that we already mentioned. The law establishes a National Committee for the Protection, Conservation, and Sustainable Management of Sea Turtles. This committee is a multi stakeholder body. It includes people from the Ministry of Environment and other agencies, scientists, nonprofits, community members, and its mandate is expansive. The committee must develop a national plan for every 5 years, identifying priority actions and sites for protection. It is tasked with recommending new protected areas, and the committee also reviews development proposals to ensure turtle populations are effectively being taken care of and enabling watchdogs and facilitating reports of uh, turtle hunting and catching. By formalizing this committee, the law creates an enduring institutional mechanism to coordinate conservation efforts across ministries, governments, and civil society. And as mentioned, very important that this committee has the representation of several stakeholders. In regards to education, there's Article 14, 20, and 21, Law 3071, emphasizing changing the hearts and minds as much as the rules. It includes articles directing the government to launch education campaigns about sea turtle conservation and the new legal protection. Already, we've seen Ministry of Environment executing some workshops, schools, and with the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts to assure awareness that consuming turtle eggs and products is now a serious offense. And the law encourages also incorporating marine conservation into schools curricula. It's already happening, ensuring future generations carry this responsibility. On the research front, the law supports scientific efforts like satellite tracking of turtles and monitoring programs, and establishes marine refuge and expanded protection waters, which will complement turtle protections by preserving key habitats. So it's looking also and tapping also into science, prioritizing and making scientific research a priority for the conservation of the environment. Then we have a very important part, which is Article 2730, which beefs up the sanctions, it gives them teeth. It references Panama's general environmental penalties, but also adds specific penalties for sea turtle capture. For example, harming or disturbing nesting area can trigger fines and the obligation to restore damages. Traffickers, on one hand, of turtles or meat face not only fines but potential criminal prosecution. And as noted, rogue tourism operators or developers can have permits canceled. To monitor the compliance, the law authorizes ranger patrols and even coordination with security forces and police patrolling in different areas. So the sanctions and enforcement supported by the local authorities, but also by the committee composed of nonprofits, is going to definitely help those sanctions to be implemented. Now let's talk about the implementation and impact of the law. Passing the law was just the beginning. The law real measures of success is now the implementation, how those concepts that we have discussed are put into practice. And the initial phases of this implementation has been promising, but also has its challenges. The law establishes the Ministry of Environment as the leading institution in charge of this implementation. And one of the first steps was the creation of the committee, mandated by the law. And the committee has already been created with marine biologists, nonprofits, community representatives, and this body has been working on the 5-year plan, action plan for sea turtle protection. This is required by law. And the meetings, the committee has already established priority actions, such as increasing night patrols, for example, on major nesting beaches, improving signs and ordinances in coastal towns, rolling out bycatch mitigation training for fishing communities, and is establishing the mapping of critical habitats for potential protection. So the committee is already starting work. It has had some pauses, as I will discuss later, because of chief of government, but it has started its work. One immediate impact has been the enforcement against illegal exploitation. Panamanian authorities have taken a noticeable harder line on turtle poaching and trade. The Ministry of Environment launched public awareness campaign with slogans like "They're not trophies, they're not for ear eating, they're not for killing," and that this now can be fined or considered serious crimes. Community members have been encouraged to use the government hotline for reports. Their phone number is 311 to report any turtle-related offenses. And as a result, local rangers and police have been more active in getting the poachers and the fishermen. In one case, for example, in 2023, a group was caught in the Pacific coast. They were extracting dozens of carey eggs, and they were arrested and had the maximum fine. So this obviously has a deterrent factor, but sanctions are being implemented because authorities now see this more as a priority. And a particular noteworthy development is how civil society is also now being supported by international organizations. Sea Turtles Conservancy, they're more organized. So this has provided like some sort of boost for the local organizations and to gather strength, to organize better, to galvanize civil society pressure for the implementation of the law. And the institutional response has been strong. As mentioned, Ministry of Education is now approaching different communities. Here's an example of Mariano. He's from the Ministry of Environment, going to schools to teach about sea turtle protection, different types of sea turtles. That is already happening. This is a photo of an area in the beach in the Pacific where there's been limited for sea turtle protection nesting, and new guidelines have been already established. Best practices have been published by the fishery agency, by the tourism agency. So there's been a strong interinstitutional response at the Ministry of Education, and that is teaching students and kids to learn about sea turtle protection. And the importance also is that this is getting a lot of media attention. This is a screen capture from a report that was being made just recently by one of Panama's leading media outlets, where they are covering all of the advancements that's happening with the law and creating awareness about the topic. Obviously, there's challenges ahead. Of course, implementation is not without challenges. Resources are always an issue. Panama conservation bodies and communities need more funding and equipment to fully enforce the law across thousands of kilometers of coast. Some remote beaches are still hard to monitor, and poachers in few areas persist, motivated by black market prices. So there's a challenge in regards to resources, to have more public servants, police officers, and technology. And that's why education is also important. And that's been implemented a little bit slow, but it's been implemented, the educational component. We must provide poachers and artisans new opportunities, such as jobs, tourism guides, park rangers, or crafting other materials. These hasn't really started yet. The education component, yes, for the school, but not yet on the communities. I know this is currently being it's being the plan is being created, but it hasn't still been implemented. And most importantly, we need more people to report. Yes, the amount of reports in regards to citadel thing in danger or capture have increased, but we know that it can increase even more. And for that, the key component of education is important. So, in summary, I mean, there's tangible process in the implementation, increased protection on the beaches, greater accountability, more collaboration between the institutions, more collaboration between the civil society. There has been a boost, and there has been the component of education. More sanctions have been applied, so yes, it's been implemented. However, it still needs time. Education component obviously takes time. The funding component has to strengthen, and we also need the committee to create the 5-year plan, which is still on hold because of government shifts. We changed government a year ago. But in conclusion, this law I think has helped Panama, dream, and also the world dream that we can make this world a better place. We can make this planet a better place for everybody. It's a story about how a small country is thinking big about how to save an ancient creature. And this has been covered by major media outlets, TV, press, national, international blogs, headlines, celebrities, creating awareness, not just for Panama, but for the world. And I think it provides some sort of hope and positivity, and has been covered in conferences like this. So I'm very thankful that we're discussing this. And it shows that even in challenging times for the environment, there's always some advancement and opportunity of reframing what's happening in the environment in Panama and in the world. As a Panamanian politician, I'm deeply proud that our country took this step. There's still a lot to be done, but I also feel a responsibility to ensure that this law truly delivers for the turtles and to share our learnings with the world. And that's why I accepted this invite, to share and to inspire that we have more of these worldwide. One country is important that advances, but we need the world to to be part of it. And it's a message to the world of a new era of environmental shift, and one that recognizes that our fellow travelers, turtles on this planet, are vital for everything, for our ecosystem, for tourism, for the economy, and they have a voice and they have guardians. And it is technical, yes, it's grounded by science and law, but it's also deeply moving because it reaffirms a fundamental truth that all living beings deserve our respect and protection. As we move forward, I hope this is part of an arc of different public policies that support and bring justice for humans, for the environment, for sea turtles, and for planet Earth. Now, before finishing, let's talk a little bit very quickly about the rights of nature laws, one of the most important laws recently approved in Panama, and I think also in the region, maybe in the world, in regards to the environment, Law 287, 2022. I was a co-sponsor of this law. We're going to go a little bit brief because I know there's not much time, but in essence, the rights of nature law is a legal, philosophical concept that recognizes nature, including ecosystems, wildlife, and natural systems, as having legal rights similar to those of a person rather than being treated merely as property or resources. Traditional environmental laws are largely anthropocentric. That means they are human centered, aiming to protect for the human's benefit. In contrast, rights of nature embrace ecocentric approach, protecting nature for nature's own sake, doing its intrinsic value. This is a paradigm shift, called Earth Pachamama or Mother Earth. Now we can see Pachamama or Mother Earth as a legal entity or rights holder. However, only a few countries have implemented national laws like this, Ecuador being one of them, Latin America, and Panama is one of those pioneering countries. Now, just to talk a little bit about one of the most important articles, well, Article 1 states its purpose, which is to recognize nature as a subject of rights, as well as the obligation of state and all persons, whether it be natural or legal, to guarantee respect and protection to these rights. In other words, Panama now legally acknowledges that nature itself can hold rights, and it imposes duties both on government and citizens to uphold those rights. Under Article 3, the law defines nature as a collective, indivisible, and self-regulation entity composed of all of its um, interrelated elements, diversity, and ecosystems, and requires that the states respect to nature for its intrinsic value and for the benefit of present and future generations. This is the fundamental shift I've been talking about in Panamanian law. Nature is no longer an object of human rights, but a rights-bearing entity of its own. Article 5 grants legal standing. This is key. Legal standing to any person or organization, whether it be individuals, NGOs, or communities, to defend the rights of nature in court or administrative proceedings. A corporation can be defended by a human. Why can't nature be defended by a human? This broad standing means anyone can sue to enforce nature's rights, reinforcing the protection the environment is a shared responsibility and empowering civil society to act on nature's behalf. Article 7 imposes an overreaching duty on Panamanian state to apply all necessary administrative, legal, and technical measures to prevent human activities from contributing to the extinction of species, the destruction of ecosystems, or the permanent alteration of natural cycles and climate. This provision basically requires the government to take preventive actions against environmental destruction, from unsustainable resources extraction to deforestation or greenhouse gas emissions, making conservation a binding responsibility. In essence, Panama's government must proactively regulate and limit activities that threaten ecosystems and species. And the law recognizes six rights for nature. These are the rights recognized. The first one is the right to exist, persist, and regenerate life cycles. Nature has the right to exist and continue its vital cycles and processes. This means ecosystems and species have a right to survive, flourish, and evolve without disruption. Panama explicitly recognizes nature's rights to persist over time and to regenerate. For example, forests regrowing and wildlife populations recovering are not just desirable outcomes, but rights to be upheld. Second right is the right of diversity of life. Nature has the right to maintain its biodiversity, the diversity of living beings, ecosystem, and elements that compose it. In other words, the rich variety of life forms, plants, animals, organisms, and ecosystems in Panama should be protected. This protects not only individual species, the overall biodiversity as a valued aspect of nature's rights. Third right is the right of water and clean water and the water cycle and its integrity. Nature is recognized to have the right to preservation of water cycle, including sufficient quantities and the quality of the water for sustained life systems and protection of water from pollution. This underscores the importance of rivers, watersheds, rainfall patterns. Then we also have, in a similar way, the rights of clean air. The law affirms that nature's right to have the quality and composition of air preserved for the benefit of life systems with protection against air pollution. This means the atmospheres cannot be treated as unlimited sink for contamination. We have to protect air quality, and it's a duty owed to nature itself. The fifth right is the right to timely and effective restoration. If nature is harmed by human activities, it has the right to be restored. Established in Article 10.5, later in Article 14, states that after any significant harm, nature must be rehabilitated promptly and effectively. Importantly, Article 14 specifies that this restoration is the state's responsibility, regardless of the latter ability to recover costs from responsible parties. In practice, this means that if an ecosystem is damaged, spill, forestation, for example, the government must ensure it is repaired. Nature must be healed as a right, even if the legal process of penalizing or billing the polluter happens afterwards. The sixth right is the right to be free from pollution and toxic waste. Nature has the right to exist free from contamination of its components by toxic or harmful substances. This includes freedom from pollution, garbage, waste, agrochemicals, radioactive materials. Essentially, the law enshrines a right of nature not to be poisoned by human activity. And just to close up, the law, I think one of the most important and interesting way it has been implemented is a landmark case. Although Panama nature law is recent, It has already begun to influence the world and Panama, and this is a super interesting case where the law was already quoted and used by the Supreme Court. Basically, in Panama, we had a 30-year-old contract for a mining project, um, which had created a huge negative impact, and the Supreme Court in 2023 unanimously declared this contract unconstitutional. And this was an open pit copper mine, one of the largest in the world, in one of the smallest countries in the world. And the ruling came after weeks of widespread protests across the country. Significantly, the courts referred and used Panama's rights of nature law as part of its legal reasoning for striking down the mining contract. In its decision, the court took an ecocentric perspective, affirming that nature is a subject of rights under Panamanian law and that the government now has a duty to ensure the highest interest of nature and nature's intrinsic values are respected as a law and as public policy.